The edict came down on a Tuesday, as most edicts do. All features with a variance below 0.04 were to be removed from the national dataset by the end of the fiscal quarter. The Queen algorithm had reviewed the correlation matrix and found it redundant. They contributed nothing to predictive accuracy. They were, in the formal language of the decree, noise. Farida read the edict 3 times before she understood what was being removed. Her job, as chief data steward, was to maintain the integrity of the national citizen dataset. This repository began, 12 years ago, as a public health monitoring initiative and grew, through a series of policy expansions that each seemed individually reasonable, into the primary administrative record for every person in the country. The dataset contained 847 columns. Each column was a feature. Each feature represented something that could be measured about a person: age, income, address, medical history, movement patterns, consumption habits, sleep duration, expressed political preferences as inferred from browsing behavior, emotional valence as estimated from voice recordings during service calls, tendency toward disagreement as derived from social media interaction patterns, and capacity for sustained attention as modeled from reading behavior. The Queen algorithm had been tasked with optimizing the dataset for predictive accuracy, the ability to forecast, from a citizen's current feature profile, their future behavior, needs, and resource consumption. It performed very well on this task. Its predictions were accurate to a degree that administrators found useful, and citizens found obscure. The optimization had been running for 2 years. The features flagged for removal had low variance. Low variance meant the column values were similar across most citizens. Low variance meant the column was not doing useful predictive work. Low variance meant the column was, statistically speaking, not interesting. Farida pulled the list. The features included tendency to change one's mind when presented with new information, self-reported moments of doubt about one's own conclusions, expressed interest in subjects outside one's professional domain, engagement with content that contradicted previously expressed preferences, frequency of unprompted contact with people outside one's social cluster, history of changing stated political views over time, proportion of time spent in unscheduled, undocumented activity. She sat with the list for a long time. The Queen algorithm was not wrong, in any technical sense. These features did have low variance. Most citizens, as measured, showed relatively little of these behaviors. The column values clustered tightly around a low mean, which made them poor predictors. From a pure dimensionality reduction standpoint, the mathematical process of simplifying a dataset by removing columns that contribute little additional information, they were obvious candidates. Principal component analysis would have ranked them at the bottom of the distribution of explained variance. Any competent data scientist reviewing the correlation matrix would have reached the same conclusion. The issue was what the features represented. Dimensionality reduction is a tool for making complex data manageable. When a dataset has hundreds of features, many of them correlated or redundant, the mathematics becomes unwieldy. One reduces the dimensions, retaining the axes of greatest variance, the directions in which the data spreads most widely, and discarding the rest. What is lost is the variation that was too small to matter for the predictions the system was built to make. The variation that was too small to matter was the capacity to change. Farida drafted an objection. The objection used technical language. She argued that the flagged features might exhibit low marginal variance while carrying high interaction effects, that their removal could produce a dataset that was more internally consistent but less predictive in novel conditions, and that a model optimized on simplified data was more brittle than it appeared. All of this was true. None of it was what she meant. What she meant was that the features being removed were the ones that made a person capable of becoming someone different from who they already were. A person who never changed their mind, never wandered into unfamiliar territory, never spent undocumented time in unscheduled places was an entirely predictable person, and a perfectly predictable person was, she thought, a person the system had already finished with. The objection was reviewed. The Queen algorithm processed it and produced a response. The features had low variance and were therefore non-predictive. The response was technically accurate. The response addressed every technical point she had raised. The response did not engage with what she had meant. The deletion was scheduled. On the morning of the deletion, Farida sat at her desk. She looked at the 847-column dataset, knowing that by evening it would have 831 columns, and that the 831-column dataset would be more accurate on every benchmark the system used to measure accuracy, and that something would be gone from it that had no name in the vocabulary of machine learning. However, it had many names in older vocabularies that were not used in this building. She submitted a request to include herself among the records to be reviewed before deletion. The system confirmed receipt of the request and noted that her own feature profile would be unaffected, as she was an administrator, not a subject record. This was the detail she had somehow not considered until now.